Welcome, everyone, to our Grit, Grace, and Gravitas webinar. So excited to see everyone's face. Today, we'll be speaking with the authors of Grit, Grace, and Gravitas and learn some key ways of transforming leadership effectiveness, presence, and impact. Personally, I believe this is a very timely topic. I think we can all use some fresh perspectives and insights for fortifying our leadership path, if you will, after an incredible pandemic year. Now, our program is being sponsored by Careers Advance, a private practice specializing in professional training and development and career planning. On that note, my name is Lisa Panarello. I'm the head of Careers Advance, and I will be your host. Two things to note before we start. One, our program is being recorded, and it will go out next week so you can reinforce what you heard, catch what you missed, and share it with your colleagues. And you can also check out past webinars on Careers Advance's YouTube channel. Secondly, for audio quality and for time consideration, everyone will be kept on mute. However, I want you to be involved. You represent a variety of industries: marketing, finance, high tech, HR, education, healthcare, engineering, and so many more. I want you to grab ideas that you can apply to your specific situation. So I'm going to encourage you to drop questions in the chat box as they arise, and we'll address as many as we can. Okay. So let's meet our authors. I'm honored to introduce to you Jane Firth. Jane is the founding partner of Firth Leadership Partners. She's recognized as an innovator in the design and delivery of executive coaching programs for the mastery of leadership communication, organizational culture, and executive presence. For over 4 decades, Jane has been a trusted coach and advisor to executives across financial services, pharmaceutical, manufacturing, publishing, healthcare, philanthropy, and technology sectors. And for her outstanding work, she received the Philadelphia Business Journal's Women in Distinction Award. Jane has an MS degree in organizational dynamics from the University of Pennsylvania. She's a long-standing member of the Forum of Executive Women and chaired the Women in Executive Leadership and Governance Committee. Among her philanthropic efforts, Jane was a co-founding partner of Globalist Local and the Beyond Our Differences Foundation. Our next guest, Andrea Zintz. Andrea is the president of Strategic Leadership Resources. She has over 40 years of experience in organizational development, leadership development, and coaching. Now, prior to launching her consulting practice, Andrea served as Vice President of Human Resources for the Johnson & Johnson subsidiary Orthobiotech, and as Director of Leadership Development at J&J Corporate Headquarters. She received her BS degree in Business Communications from Emerson College and a master's and PhD from Fielding Graduate University. She's a current member of the National Organizational Development Network and recipient of the YWCA Tribute to Women in Industry Award. And finally, in addition to Grit, Grace, and Gravitas, Andrea co-authored Orchestrating Sustainable Innovation, a symphony in sound bites. Jane, Andrea, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
Great. I'd like to start our conversation off with understanding the why behind your book. What was your motivation for writing Grit, Grace, and Gravitas? Jane, why don't you kick us off?
Okay. So in my work, I've observed striking differences in leaders. Differences that can be seen and felt in their way of being, in how they use their power, and in how they relate to people. I wanted to understand the qualities and skills that were present in leaders whose impact was constructive and inspiring and empowering. And to take what could be learned, make it accessible to any one of us who was interested in shaping their presence, leadership, and impact. And sometimes the opposite of what we're admiring or looking at can give us critical insight. And following a dinner that Andrea and I had with an executive 5 or 6 years ago, it was obvious that this leader was really good at strategy and performance, but she didn't at all get the part about people. And she was dismissive and condescending and disrespectful in the ways that she related to people. What was missing in her struck a chord, and fundamental qualities and skills that exemplary leaders have, that I have noticed, suddenly all crystallized for me. I thought about their grit, which, they all have persistence and determination for sure. And I thought about their gravitas, and they all have tremendous depth of knowledge and experience. But, and this was the key, they had grace, which has incredible dimensions to it, like their compassion and how they can inspire and bring out the best in people. And I saw that grace actually flows through their grit and flows through their gravitas in the ways they use their power and in the ways they relate to people. So for me, it was a remarkable moment of clarity. And that's when I decided to write this book. And I was really excited. I called Andrea. I shared the insights I'd had, and I invited her to work on it with me. And happily, she said, great, and here we are.
Fantastic. It's really a personal connection for the whole book. So Andrea, why did you decide to partner with Jane on the writing of the book?
When Jane approached me to co-write Grit, Grace, and Gravitas, the power of the idea was very exciting for me, especially since the importance of grace and one's ability to lead is essential for transforming one's leadership, presence, and impact. So having worked within corporations as an insider, I've observed how leaders sometimes behave poorly and they lack self-awareness regarding their impact on others. And these problems in their lack of self-awareness include inequities, a lack of empathy and appreciation, a lack of respect for the employees they lead. And this is partly due to the corporate culture. I saw how employees suffered, and this inspired me to find ways to create better conditions for leadership and organization development, developing better cultures that help everyone to feel valued, psychological safety, and satisfaction in their work environments. We created our book to include research, examples, and tools that assist leaders and those who want to become leaders to evolve, advance, and make a positive difference in attaining success in their influence.
Well, I appreciate you sharing the heart behind the book, and it certainly has a lot of applicable values. So let's dive in a little deeper to the title of the book. I mean, we've heard the words grit, grace, and gravitas. These have been words in our lexicon for decades. So they're familiar to us. However, I think the terms carry different meanings in different circles. Mm-hmm. So Andrea, could you give us your definition of each of these terms, specifically as they relate to the workplace?
Sure. So we found through our experiences that while every leader is unique, exemplary leaders stand out on the basis of three critical skills. One is exemplary leaders who have grit. Grit is essential. It's an uncompromising commitment to performance excellence and strategic focus. For example, grit is essential for overcoming obstacles, for having difficult conversations, for persistence needed in getting to the desired finish line. But grit can also become imbalanced. And our book provides insight into why leaders need grace integrated into their grit. Now, secondly, exemplary leaders have gravitas. Now, it's also critical, and it comes from a leader's knowledge and experience that contributes to excellence in performance. For example, an essential aspect of a leader's gravitas has much to do with the time and energy they've invested to acquire the knowledge and skills they have to date, the risks they've taken, the commitment and discipline to excel and ask a lot of themselves. But gravitas can also become imbalanced. And again, our book clarifies why leaders need grace integrated into their gravitas. Thirdly, exemplary leaders have grace. Now, what do we mean? What's the definition of grace for us? Well, grace is about constructive power. For instance, relating to others constructively, in considerate, empathetic, and genuinely caring ways. Grace rests on the two pillars of reaction management and relationship intelligence. And this provides insight and access to the social emotional skills and qualities leaders can rely on to harness their constructive power. So through our work, we've seen that infusing grit and gravitas with grace creates a more potent executive presence and impact, accounting for important differences in culture. So it's important to consider the ways that grace elevates the impact of a leader's grit and a leader's gravitas.
Seems like three very well needed skills. We can call it attributes. You can call it whatever you want, but the three of them pulled together can make one wonderful leader. And you brought up another term, Andrea, that we hear a lot: executive presence. Now, I would imagine everyone on this call would agree that you don't have to have the title of executive to have executive presence.
Correct.
So I'm interested to hear what else you don't need. Jane, you dive into the book about 3 common myths of executive presence. So can you share what those myths are and how grit, grace, and gravitas fits into one's executive presence, a sort of ominous term?
Yeah. And, you know, it's got a lot of confusion around it. And we'll go to the first one, which is you're born with it or not. Well, executive presence isn't about having something in your personality that you were born with. But your uniqueness, however, that is something you are born with. And your unique way of being with people is something within your power to hone, develop, author, and evolve. So this includes the quality of how you listen to others. That affects your presence. The interest you take in their success. That affects your presence. The way in which you lend your support, communicate, inspire, and bring out the best in those you lead. No one is born with these skills. They're learned. So anyone with a sincere desire can purposely take ownership of the impact they currently have and evolve from there. The second prevailing myth is if you're an introvert, you can't have executive presence. So what does the idea of being an introvert mean? Many believe without question that if they see themselves as an introvert, they're at a disadvantage in terms of being able to develop a strong executive presence. But in fact, people who see themselves as introverts can be the most extraordinary leaders with a calming and reassuring presence. Susan Cain saw herself as an introvert. Her book, entitled Quiet, points out ways that people get beyond this label. How? Presence can become fueled by your passion to lead and make a difference. In her case, she began to see herself reach beyond her introversion as she adeptly defended one of her clients in a negotiation. She was present in ways she had never been before. This surprising outcome led to her research and the writing of her book. Introverts can have extraordinary leadership capabilities and presence. Their capability to reflect deeply and develop evidence and logical approaches to ideas and contributions becomes even more valuable through their leadership. The third myth is about that presence is all about charisma. And a dictionary definition of charisma is compelling attractiveness or charm that can inspire devotion in others. Well, words infused with common meaning can be misleading, such as another dictionary definition for charisma, a divinely conferred power or talent. And we were laughing yesterday when we were in our preparations saying, you know, no baby comes out with a charisma button. So while many icons can be seen as charismatic, there are also many who made a significant difference through their leadership, but would not be considered charismatic. For instance, beyond his meager circumstances, consider Abraham Lincoln, who he was very humble, but he had a really driven force to educate himself, communicate and connect and help people understand important perspectives. His drive for social justice was embedded in his values, which provided the purpose for his leadership and his impact. He had many challenges to overcome, such as occasional depression. He had a lot of resistance to his shabby look, his failures to succeed, and the numerous naysayers that he encountered. His legacy was the result of how his grit, grace, and gravitas came together. His grit was the result of his persistence. His gravitas took root through the knowledge and experience he forged for himself over the years. But he infused them with his grace, using the language of inspiration and reason. His leadership and his presence transformed our nation. Everyone's presence has an impact. Yours does, mine does. There's no mystery here, and you don't have to be an extrovert, and it's not about something you're born with. The skills and qualities that evolve your presence are readily available. And that is what we worked extensively on in our book to make it accessible.
It's such a good point. I don't think we're probably on this call saying, yeah, I know we're not born with it, but I think we forget that. And we just look at someone and figure, oh, they just have it.
Right.
So, and it's so not true. And one word really resonated with me in all of those myths that you just described was the ownership, taking ownership of ourselves to get where we want to get, to become whatever type of leader that we want to become.
Exactly.
And I have to say, when it comes to, I think that sort of the charisma is sort of involved in my next question, because the charisma and the introvert kind of, to me, are a little bit combined. So Andrea, I have a question for you. I've read research that shows introverts can have extraordinary leadership capabilities. I mean, you've just talked about it, right, Jane? Mm-hmm. And I've seen it, I've witnessed it. So I am curious now, are introverts in higher demand? Are extroverts sort of in danger of becoming devalued?
Well, very interesting questions there. I think there's a tendency overall to assume that leaders need to be extroverts, and that's not surprising when you consider the example set by high-profile leaders. Most leaders in the public eye exhibit outgoing social tendencies, and they're confident public speakers. They tend to hold down key spots at big events, and they're frequently interviewed or profiled in news media. It all combines to support the idea that good leaders are genial, gregarious, and hyper-confident. Well, does that mean you need to be an extrovert to be a successful leader? And although many qualities that we want all leaders to have, like being a deep thinker, collaborative, the ability to keep their cool in a crisis, compassionate, they're more often found in quiet, introverted leaders. So it's easy to think that introverts and extroverts are mutually exclusive from each other. So in reality, nobody is a pure introvert or extrovert. Most of us demonstrate qualities for both introverts and extroverts. For example, someone may be very sociable, but still only consider a small portion of their acquaintances as close friends. Similarly, someone may make a quick, emotionally driven decision, even though they're more accustomed to carefully planning their response. There are quite a few successful business leaders who describe themselves as largely introverted, like Microsoft co-founder Bill Gates, former Yahoo CEO Marissa Mayer, Facebook co-founder Mark Zuckerberg, and Berkshire Hathaway CEO Warren Buffett, and Jeff Bezos, the founder and CEO of Amazon. However, while all of these leaders may demonstrate qualities of introverts, and they're out there, they can also exhibit extrovert qualities when they're needed. All of the leaders mentioned here are comfortable in front of a microphone. They make many of the highest profile announcements for their companies. They're unflappable in media interviews, and they take the point to speak to any controversies their companies may be drawn into. So although most research into this topic tends to give an advantage to extroverted leaders, there is a very growing body of work suggesting that introverts have value. Susan Cain, who Jane mentioned, has argued that there is a zero correlation between being the best talker and having the best ideas. And while silence and listening can sometimes be portrayed as signs of weakness, there has been a growing awareness that being an effective leader can be just as effective as being a loud talker when it comes to leadership. So in reality, all business leaders need to have both introverted and extroverted qualities, and leaders need to have the flexibility to adopt and display the qualities that will elicit the best results from their teams or organizations.
I guess a lot of it comes down to blending, because I'm a huge extrovert. Anyone that meets me know I'm out there in public speaking. I have a loud voice. I certainly am not shy about sharing my opinion. So I look to benefit from the more introverted listening skill set to tone me down a bit. Yet there is value in my style of speaking and presenting. So I want everyone on this call who may be an extrovert not to fear, oh, you can't be you. It is, though, to your point, Andrea, is finding that balance so that your introvertedness, meaning your listening skills and your ability to remain calm, helps to really portray the value of that extrovertedness, gregarious. So you're not just kind of blowing over everyone in the room with your personality and ideas.
That's right.
Interesting. All right. So let's take the definitions of grit, grace, and gravitas to the next level. And you started to hint at this, Andrea. Where I want to share my screen again. Okay. In the book, you describe the constructive power of grit, grace, and gravitas operating in harmony. Mm-hmm. And when we're out of balance, there's a greater potential for leaders to fail. So let's get our head wrapped around this. Andrea, what do you mean by constructive power? And can you describe maybe situations that reflect what this imbalance looks like that you speak of in the book?
Sure. So here's the secret to the considerable value of grace. It changes your impact for the better and increases the value of your grit and gravitas. The skills and qualities of grace are rooted in using power constructively. Now, you mentioned constructive power. It's always within our reach. And when we reach for it, our impact changes for the better, enhancing our approaches, our behaviors, the quality of how we connect with people, and our demeanor, which by that I mean our overall attitude and way of being. So grace helps us deal with difficult people and situations with compassion, energy, and inspiration. So let's consider how grace helps us deal with difficult situations. Think of a recent time your emotions were triggered at work. For instance, someone may have criticized you in front of everyone in a meeting and you felt embarrassed. Or perhaps you felt upset because you were passed over for something you thought you deserved. Or maybe you felt frustrated in trying to explain something you were trying to get across to someone. Rather than struggle in the moment, find fault with yourself, or blame someone else, grace gives you the compassionate permission to take time to gather your thoughts. Grace helps you understand the emotions you feel, regain your composure, and find the clarity you need to more effectively deal with what happened. Research has shown that emotional intelligence is much more important than IQ for success. People need environments and organizations that provide psychological safety, meaning, respect, and regard. So exemplary leaders work to bring people together in meaningful ways to accomplish the goals that matter. They are able to do this because they use their constructive power. Their approaches are constructive. Their behaviors are constructive. The quality of how they connect with people is constructive, and their overall way of being, their demeanor, comes across again as constructive. So we call this the A, B, C, and D of executive presence and impact. Another example here is that grit without grace can be abrasive. One's imbalance of too much grit can come across as domineering. For instance, when a leader's brusque impatience or intolerance has people walking on eggshells, or when the imbalance of too little grit can have a leader avoid holding people to account or avoid having important conversations. Now, when it comes to gravitas, gravitas without grace can show up as arrogance. The imbalance of too much gravitas then comes across as condescending. The imbalance of too little gravitas can have a leader come across as hesitant and indecisive, which can leave people without clear guidance and direction. Of course, no one of us is perfect. Every single one of us has some foibles or flaws. How can we address them constructively to go forward in better ways?
Perfect lead into my question, because there's very poignant pieces of information you brought in there. And if we're thinking about, well, gee, I'm not imbalanced. Well, how do you even know? So Jane, can you explain some of the science, excuse me, I'm going to Jane. Yeah, Jane. How can a leader develop awareness of their imbalance? Because the awareness, I think, is the whole big piece here. So how can they develop that awareness, and what should they look out for, and why even bother?
Well, you know, when Lisa, when we're aspiring to develop ourselves, we've got to start by looking at the gaps between where we are and where we want to evolve to. But it's important not to take a judgmental view of our flaws, because that closes things down rather than opens us up to our development. We can't change what we haven't owned and taken responsibility for. But by approaching our flaws constructively, we can actually use them to grow. Exemplary leaders are aware of their foibles and flaws, and they take responsibility for them. You're not going to find them saying, "This is how I am, deal with it." You're not going to find them using the strategy of doing whatever they want and then apologizing later. You will find them having the difficult conversations to restore alignment, and you'll find them working towards equitable win-win outcomes. We've done a lot of work to develop an assessment, which is available at the end of our book, that clarifies the imbalances of grit and of gravitas in depth, what we call the too muches and the too littles of grit and gravitas. So using the skills and qualities of grace, you can manage the all-important impact of your grit and gravitas, so that if you find there's an imbalance that shows up in an approach you took, or how you behaved, or something that was missing in the quality of how you connected with people, or in your demeanor, your attitude, your overall way of being, you can use your constructive power to address the imbalance and evolve, even as you're resolving these situations and problems. And you ask, why bother? And of course, the answer to this depends on what kind of leader it's important to you to be and why. Your why. But because grace changes how a leader leads, it has an impact on the norms of the culture that get established, and it determines the social contract of how people relate to one another. More and more, I think we've all noticed this, people really want environments in which they can thrive and be valued. And this directly influences how challenges are faced and dealt with, how obstacles are overcome, how people think and work together to innovate, solve problems, and align themselves to achieve what matters. So we need to pay attention to these things, and leaders that do derive great benefits within their organizations.
Two great points for me that coming out of there, or words I should say, the open-mindedness to even wanting to find out if you're imbalanced, and the desire to take a breath and figure out what's happening. Is my leadership working or not? So to me, and I work with a lot of individuals on coaching them through the self-discovery piece of it. So they need to, you kind of have to be open-minded to question yourself. Am I coming off the way I think I'm coming off? What are the perceptions out there? Because perceptions are reality. So having conversations with those that you lead can really open the door to finding out, is there a misperception between how you feel you're coming off of leaders and vice versa?
And Lisa, you have to create the psychological safety for those, because we all have that internal criticizer who's all too ready to tell us everything that's wrong with us. And that has to be managed and understood so that we don't feed it power. What this is a constructive approach to seeing how to develop. We all have potential to step into. And it's really about giving ourselves permission to evolve, not finding fault and blaming ourselves. It's more about wanting to improve and be the best we can be.
That kind of leads me right into the next question, because what you said before really resonated with me. Compassionate permission to stop and think before reacting. In your book, you talk about the two pillars of grace. I mean, you do more than mention the pillars. You dive quite deep, and for good reason. So I want to look at the first pillar you mentioned, which is reaction management. And as you point out in the book, and even before earlier today, exemplary leaders excel in their ability to bring out the best in the men and women they lead. And I have to think that that is quite challenging today. I mean, leaders are under extreme pressure to strategize, to influence, and to deliver, all while they're responding to economic and emotional fallout from this pandemic. So Jane, can you explain some of the science behind reaction management and some of the steps leaders can take to gain what you call dominion or control over how they behave when things are really at their worst? And they sure are today.
Yeah, because every one of us gets triggered. And how do we use that constructively? And, use our anger constructively, use all the things that happen when we react. So here's the brain science we all need to know. When the amygdala is triggered, our higher order thinking, located in the prefrontal cortex, shuts down. So a reaction happens, the amygdala is triggered, and one of two states occurs: fight or flight. An important part of managing our reaction is recognizing that sometimes we need a little time and that compassionate permission, self-compassion, to process what triggered our reaction. By managing our reactions, we are able to recognize the amygdala in action, to know when we're in the reactive zone, so to speak, and see that fight or flight reaction in ourselves in play. So we can elevate our presence of mind to choose how we want to respond, to find, well, what is the best outcome we could have here in whatever it was that triggered this reaction. So managing our reactions is kind of the equivalent of moving in one room in our brain, pardon me, where the amygdala shuts us down, to another room in our brain where we can really think and regain our self-composure and our presence of mind to how to handle something in the best way, a constructive way. So we leave the room where the amygdala causes us to want to fight or run away, and we regain the benefits of the higher order thinking that by virtue of managing our reaction is now available to us. And that's where, I'm going to repeat, we can call on our constructive power and use our reactions constructively. The goal in evolving our leadership is to have the skills to manage our reactions in ways that provide the ability to more quickly restore our perspective and presence of mind and access to higher order thinking. Now, that's not to say we all have these challenges that, sometimes we're just caught off guard. So again, compassionate permission, just give yourself time, and change and elevate your perspective towards others' emotional reactions as well. So we have an example, which I think we have time for, as to how reaction management can help to transform leadership presence and impact in a client we'll call Kyle. He was a sales executive that was very new to his role, and early on a situation took place that gave him the opportunity to put the reaction management skills he'd been learning into practice. Here's what happened. In preparation for the quarterly executive meeting, his new team prepared the market information and projections he needed for that meeting. And the team wanted to make the results seem a little better than they were because they didn't want to admit that they were struggling with certain sales and profits results. So they provided Kyle with projections that were a little too optimistic about not only the remainder of the year, but the year to follow. And it didn't occur to him to double check the report he'd received. And he made the mistake of taking the team's work at face value. As a result, in the meeting, he found himself in a very uncomfortable compromise position. And he looked as though he wasn't on top of the market trends and that he lacked control over his team. And this was very embarrassing for him. But he didn't become defensive. He kept his composure outwardly, but inwardly, his mind was racing. And he shrank back, waiting for the meeting to end, just wanted to get to his office as quickly as possible and process what happened in private. So how did he do this? His first step was to recognize the tension he was feeling. He noticed that his hands were shaking, and he took some slow breaths to calm himself. Then he looked more deeply at the emotions he was feeling and the messages they contained. He realized he felt both exposed and embarrassed. And so next, he asked his administrator to hold his call for 30 minutes. He closed his door, took out a paper and pen, and he wrote the word embarrassed at the top of the page, and he listed all of the concerns and thoughts. It just tumbled out. Next, he wrote down the word anxiety. And again, he listed the thoughts and the concerns that came to his mind about his team. And he noticed his responsibility for having taken the team's information at face value. He thought about, well, what would be an outcome worth having? And he wrote down some notes to himself. He envisioned the outcomes as strengthening his relationship with his team. And he also saw some steps he could take to restore his reputation with his peers and his boss. So here are a few of the actions he took. First, he met with his boss. He took responsibility and asked for his boss's advice about the approaches he could take with his team and his peers. Secondly, he pulled his staff together to discuss the experience that had happened at the executive meeting. And what he let them know was that straight talk and honesty was very critical in how he wanted them to work together going forward. And he said to them, you know, the facts are the facts, and we'll work with them, and we'll strategize together whatever those facts are. Thirdly, Kyle and his staff established their rules of engagement, and the team worked through a plan that Kyle approved, and they clearly understood what would be expected of them. And you might be thinking, oh my God, it would take a lot of time to go through these steps. But I want you to think about the time and energy it would take to deal with the residual damage if this kind of situation is allowed to go unchecked. Without reaction management, situations like this can derail teamwork and productivity, and morale and performance can suffer.
I'm impressed with that executive's work. I think that's the piece of the puzzle that, you know, life is moving at lightning speed, and we don't necessarily take the time to stop to think and analyze the situation, us in the situation, uncover what our triggers are, because they run deep.
Yes.
So to work on reaction management requires time and intention.
Yes.
For sure. Well, what's that?
And permission.
And permission. Yeah, permission to do so, for sure, from you and all those around you. I mean, and your staff, your teams would certainly applaud you, I think, if they recognize that you've taken that kind of time and effort to recognize what you're doing and how it's impacting everyone. Well, let's look at the other pillar, the second side of this, relationship management. Now, what I understand the basics of this to mean is to literally gather insights about others in order to adjust one's approach to an interpersonal interaction to make it more effective. So Andrea, could you give us more context around relationship intelligence and maybe share a quick example of one of the leadership wake-up calls that you describe in the book?
Great. So relationship intelligence, that provides a leader with the knowledge of emotions, how and why they're affected. They affect other people and yourself and their performance. And with its roots in brain science and emotional intelligence, as Jane explained, relationship intelligence provides critical knowledge for bringing out the best in people and empowering them when it matters most. So as leaders, relationship intelligence helps us understand how to keep morale high, how to help people find their footing with unexpected situations and challenges, and how to help team members who are facing demands that are increasing the pressure they're under recover from that. So let's take a look at an example of a client that we call Craig, who is an executive in a government role. Now, Craig turned to increasing his relationship intelligence by increasing his self-awareness. Self-awareness is so important in all of this. So through his willingness to look at his foibles and flaws, he came to the realization that the way you relate to yourself directly connects the way you relate to others. Everyone Craig worked with thought he was brilliant and valued his knowledge and experience. The problem was he used his brilliance in ways that closed everyone else out. He wanted to be the leader with the best ideas and solutions, thinking this would add value and be of service to others. So with the help of a leadership assessment, Craig saw imbalances in his grit and his gravitas. For instance, he saw that he lacked some important skills for listening and creating the conditions for dialogue and collaboration, and he saw how this was getting in his way. So as Craig became more self-aware, he realized that although he gained a great deal of satisfaction by giving others his advice, an imbalance he recognized was the imbalance of thinking one's opinion is the only one that matters, going on and seeming pedantic, speaking only on send and not listening to receive. He became more self-aware of how he defaulted to dominating the room by doing all the talking, citing evidence to defend his points, and insisting that his advice would be the best way to solve problems. So in considering the feedback, he realized that he lacked the awareness and skills required for asking questions, listening to understand, and creating the conditions that invite dialogue and collaboration. So among the aspirations Craig had identified for himself was a sincere desire to become a better leader with his team. And he practiced skills to increase his constructive power and create a more engaging relationship with his stakeholders. And he let his team know that he was working on these skills so they knew what to look for in him. That's important. So as Craig worked on his development plan, he focused on asking engaging questions of his team and peers. And he listened very carefully to what others thought and proposed and considered their challenges and ideas. His team members immediately began to experience Craig's efforts to improve. They really appreciated and benefited from the engaging collaboration that was now present in their meetings. So as Craig learned from his journey, reaction management and relationship intelligence skills are essential social skills that help leaders evolve both their presence and their impact.
Kind of relates to what Jacqueline had just mentioned in her chat about transparency, being transparent about, I'm actually working on myself. You know, it's being humble to say that, but yes, I think it would be much appreciated by your teams and your colleagues and even those that you report to.
Well, let me just say one other thing about that. If you don't tell people what you're planning to do as a leader or how you're doing something differently, they're not going to pay that much attention to it. They'll say, oh, you did it once. And then what happens afterwards is, oh, they'll go back to normal. But if they tell you that's what they want to do and they'll pay attention to it, that makes it quicker.
Yeah, and it could even help increase a little bit of the accountability that that leader has for what he just said he or she was going to do, right?
Exactly.
Now, I've got 2 more questions, but I want to remind everyone on this call, if you've got one, throw it in the chat, please.
Oh.
Now, the book sort of culminates here, in my opinion. The book not only provides nuggets of applicable wisdom with illustrative stories, a couple of what you just shared, but it also offers a great tool that leaders can leverage, the beta model. I found this model quite compelling. It's like a culmination of the book into one huge takeaway. And the model, as you described, is designed to help leaders create a psychologically safe, engaging, and high-performing culture. So Jane, explain to us the foundation of your beta model and maybe walk us through quickly how leaders can use it to diagnose what you call team dysfunction.
Okay. So the accomplishment of what matters most in work and life depends on the combined intelligence, commitment, determination, and coordinated efforts of people. And high performance in the final analysis, whether you're looking at an individual's or a group's performance, is always a function of people working well together. Some of the greatest barriers to performance and accomplishment arise when a team's members are dealing with issues such as conflicting approaches and power struggles, a lack of opportunity to grow, and competing agendas that negatively impact the team's alignment and therefore their ability to perform at their best. We created the beta model as a guide to understanding and providing for the social needs of groups and teams. Because when these needs are met, people not only work better together, they're actually more fulfilled and happy to be where they are. So we created the beta model so leaders could identify and diagnose social needs that are not being met and help eliminate the stressful effects that may be occurring. So we're going to use the example of a client we're going to call Amber. She was our youngest exemplary leader. She had interviewed for a position of vice president to lead a team that had gone through significant problems with the leader Amber was replacing. Having been hired for the role, she took steps in talking with someone in HR to gain an in-depth understanding of each of her direct reports. She shared the following: that after the head of HR and I had some important discussions about the team I'd be leading, he gave me insight into each of the people on my team and helped me understand what had taken place and why there had been so many difficulties. Based on the helpful information he gave her, Amber recognized the importance of building trust with the team she was about to inherit. She also recognized how important it was to listen in a way that would help her gain understanding and be able to neutralize the negativity that had developed over the prior years. She was keen to see the potential in each of the members of her team and think about how they could each be developed. She thought it was important to keep in mind that she had come from the outside, and she knew it was important to not just barge in. She took time with each of her team members and talked about their expectations, their hesitations, and understand what they were looking for in a leader. She heard their concerns, like, would she be able to understand what they did, and how would she deal with the fact that they did not feel like a team? And because she was new, they were on the lookout to see what she would do. You know, would she listen first or just change things? Would she represent them? This was a really important one, to the higher levels of leadership within the organization. How would she represent them? And was she a leader who would value them? And was she a leader they could trust? So paying very close attention to what her team members had to say. She had an interaction with them where they let her know almost immediately that talking with her was very different than what they'd been dealing with over the last few years. She also asked them at that point to tell her what they needed from her. For instance, one of them said she was really quite bored. She wanted some projects that offered a challenge and a chance to grow. And because of how Amber listened and what she put together to develop this person, they felt empowered to grow and contribute for the first time in a long time. So as young as she was, Amber saw the importance of developing the conditions for belonging, for generating a sense of being a part of something meaningful together. She shared with them because she knew they had felt out of the loop before. Back to what someone wrote in the chat, that information and transparency mattered to her. She told her team, everything I can share with you, I will. Trust me that if something is such that I can't share it with you, I will have your backs. I will go to bat for each of you, and I will go to bat for our team. She hoped her promises would ensure a sense that she was someone they could trust and count on to have their best interest at heart. And by letting her team know that she had their backs, she really sincerely had pledged her advocacy and support, which set the conditions for their empowerment. So now we have belonging and we have the empowerment in beta. One last thing to consider, and we also have trust and we also have alignment, sorry. One last thing to consider. She had taken the risk of being very vulnerable with her team. And she found herself in taking this risk saying that there was a lot that they knew that she didn't, that she would do the best she could, but that she would make mistakes. And she asked them to please have patience with her. I want us to be a team, is what she was conveying. Somehow showing her own vulnerability helped her team members feel even more safe in sharing their feelings. She told them that she wanted and valued their perspectives, but at the end of the day, they could count on her to make the decisions. So in so many ways, she brought about that sense of belonging and empowerment, trust, and alignment for and with her team. And in the model that we provide, all of the conditions that create the belonging or get in the way of a sense of belonging, create empowerment or get in the way of empowerment, or create or get in the way of trust, or create and get in the way of alignment, are available for you.
I think that correlates for me in the book. Yes, the beta model is very specific, and what the book brings to light is some of the questions that you just ask. It shows here are some questions you can ask to diagnose what the dysfunctions are among the team, and I think that's the big thing. And Suzanne, you mentioned it in the chat. Thank you very much. It does come back to diving into questions. Well, on that note, I've got one final question. Not everyone is a leader in a position of titled authority. So how can non-executive leaders leverage grit, grace, and gravitas to positively change their company's culture? So influence up. Andrea, your thoughts?
Sure. Leadership starts with being willing to go beyond any specific role or status. Yes, you can define this by role or status, but we encourage a deeper understanding into what being a leader is all about. Now, recently we led a program, or actually earlier this week, and in one of our breakout sessions, one of the participants shared the realization that she took the time to consider the kind of leader it was important for her to be with those she led. But what took her by surprise was seeing that she did not bring this level of awareness to her interactions with upper management. She had a diminished version of herself that she brought to those interactions. So to influence up is not a matter of role, of status, or of confidence. Rather, it's the ability to remember that we are human beings and that every human being has challenges, vulnerabilities, pain, loss, difficult situations they've had to face. They are not their role, no more than you are. So in the addendum of our book, we provide you with an internal bearings exercise that we designed, where you can identify ways to express the difference you personally would like to make and give yourself the permission to do so. You don't have to have a title. We designed this exercise as a way of charting a path forward that serves to define and anchor yourself to your purpose and your aspirations as a person and a leader. The process includes steps to personally reflect on questions that would help you connect with your highest personal and leadership aspirations. So the questions that we start with are, who do I admire? And this could be anyone you know from your childhood, or a teacher you've had, or a person or character you've read about in a favorite book, or a character you've seen in a film or play. It could even be a colleague, a leader, somebody you've worked for or with. The next question we ask you is, when you think about the leaders you've admired and those who've inspired you, how would you describe the way they connect with people and the ways they influence people? Taking these answers into consideration, what were their approaches and how did they behave? And what did you observe that you respected and admired? And the next step is the work of arriving at the heart of the matter for yourself in defining the essential elements of your own aspirations, your values, your qualities, the legacy you want, what we call your internal bearings. So there are 3 questions for this. First, what is my ideal for my leadership and what's worth it? What's it worth reaching for? Secondly, what values and qualities distinguish my ideal? And thirdly, what legacy would I most like to leave? What would I like to be remembered for? So this is a deeply personal exploration involving the qualities and skills needed to evolve as a person and as a leader. The remainder of the internal bearings exercises helps you find the imbalances in your grit and gravitas, along with the actions you may take to address them through grace. We hope that you're going to give yourself the gift of our book, which includes the internal bearings exercise we've just been discussing at the very end of the book. And we'd love to hear from you, your thoughts about the book.
Angie, that was great. And before I close us up, I know we're on the hour. I wanted to address one question that came in through the chat. In 30 seconds or less, what's one piece of advice you can give to leaders for retaining employees? Because many of them are leaving jobs in this post-pandemic market.
Jane, you want to take that one?
What is it that makes them want to leave? And what is it that makes them want to stay? And I think that exploring the heart and soul of why we care about people and what we want to leave them with, in terms of what kind of an experience that's meaningful, enriching, allows them to thrive. People don't leave organizations where they do feel valued and they do feel a part of something they're proud to be a part of. They stay, even if their pay has to be cut. You know what? We're in this together. Let's all take a slight paycheck and get ourselves through this difficult period. And then, when people have a sense that they are held in, I'm going to use the word affection, like they're cared about, they're not going to leave, but they will when they have a sense that they're being dealt with in ways that are, you know, destructive or tear them down or don't value them or pile the work on with no appreciation or, you know, expect them to do without any respect work that they're not being paid enough for.
Great.
So, you know, every leader has to really look at what it is that makes people feel like, I really want to be a part of this organization. This leader is special,
Right.
and I'm not leaving.
Right. Asking those questions. Well, before I close, I put your LinkedIn addresses in the chat so everyone can talk with you more. So before we close, did you want to just final thoughts, Jane?
I just want to say this. Ariana Huffington wrote in her book, The Fourth Instinct, that Francois Gillot once told her, there are doors in time. And she noted, we're facing such a door in time right now, an opening for great possibilities of a new being and for a breakthrough in our evolution. For the first time, something as vast and epic as the destiny of mankind depends on something as personal and intimate as the way each one of us chooses to live, think, and behave. What becomes possible when we think, live, and behave through our constructive power? What becomes possible in your evolution as a person, as a leader? What can transform as a result of your grit and gravitas, having the constructive power of grace flowing through them? I'll tell you, your people won't leave your organization, but we hope you find some of the answers you need through the book we've written. Writing it was both rigorous and a labor of love. And we want to thank you. Thank you for your time today, and let you know we are wishing you all the best.
Well, I thank you both, Jane and Andrew, for being here. And for those of you that want more, I've put their LinkedIn addresses and the link to the book on Amazon. Go reach out, strike up conversations, check out the book to get more guidance for how you're going to lead your team. And I also want to thank everyone on this call, you, my audience. I mean, your participation, your sharing questions, just even being here, you give me reason for being. So but one thing before we go, mark your calendars for September 30th. I'll be hosting a webinar on Focus to Evolve. My guests will share progressive techniques for managing time and priorities to achieve the stress-free, productive life that we're looking for. And final thought, our conversation does not have to end here. Reach out to me on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, email, wherever. Share your ideas, progress, your questions. Keep in touch. Because when we work together, everyone's mission is possible.
Love that, Lisa.
Thank you all. See you next time.